reaction from the developing countries you talk to?
Kind of confusion at first. It was not a popular message, I will say. But they sort of kind of got it. Like, I think that a lot of these countries, they see how Beijing operates in their country. They don't need us to tell them that China, that these Belt and Road deals come with a boatload of corruption, with a boatload of bad environmental practices, with a boatload of bad labor practices, and all sorts of and terrible quality. They don't need us to tell them that, because they get to live through it and live through the consequences of it. And these projects, these Belt and Road projects, all of this, this global outreach by the People's Republic of China, it's great for the elites in these developing countries, but it's pretty terrible for the actual people. And so I think that there's a lot of space there that we don't take advantage of in terms of how we engage around this. We talk to the elites about how bad China is, and they're like, what are you talking about? I just got a new Mercedes thanks to the corruption that I got from the Belt and Road Project in my country. And so, yeah, they're pretty impervious to that conversation. But when you're talking to civil society, when you're talking to labor unions, when you're talking to environmental organizations and other grassroots people in these countries, they don't need to hear from us about how bad these projects are, because they are dealing with the downstream consequences of it.
Right. Well, I mean, I think one of the challenges is that, there's like about 200 countries in the world, and most of them, the majority, are dictatorships, more or less. And most of them are small, right? And so you have a lot of these small dictatorships, and China, as you mentioned, through its whole we're part of the global South, even though they're not. They're like, basically the leader for these dictatorships, and probably over 100 countries are seeing China as their leader, because the corrupt leaders of those dictatorships get, the benefits, they get their Mercedes and so on. And then each of these countries gets an equal vote in the United Nations General Assembly. That's insane to me.
And by the way, most of them pay $10,000 a year.
I mean, there's almost like a feeling that, well, the U.S. owes it to the world to pay for these international organizations, right?
That is definitely part of the, 100%. Yeah.
I'm just imagining these UN events, food paid for by American taxpayers, chairs paid for, all these nice elites of these dictatorships being
Whining
very
and dining.
comfortable.
And
I hope they're very comfortable.
I remember when the Trump administration, right, we pulled out of the WHO after COVID, and what an incredible brouhaha that was. I can't imagine the backlash over pulling out of the UN or not funding the UN.
This is what I'm taking. Defund the UN.
Well, I mean, look, if I had $18 billion.
So a lot of our contributions, a lot of that $18 billion is purely voluntary. Our assessed contribution is a small fraction of that. So we, let's all pay our assessed contribution and not bellyache about it. Fine. That's again a very small amount. We should still require better practices and work on the waste, fraud, and abuse issues and institutional reform issues attached to the assessed contribution. But when it comes to our voluntary contributions, we need to really think very carefully about what it is that we are getting for those voluntary contributions every single year that we make them. And we shouldn't just automatically give them the way that we do. And I think that that's, there's become this kind of automatic reflex that, there's a humanitarian appeal, or there's this, or there's that, and we're just going to give our percentage right off the top. And we've got to stop doing that. If we want to hold these agencies, funds, and programs and the institutions that they report up through accountable, we have to actually become much more hard-headed about the way we give money to the UN. That's just the bottom line here.
I mean, wouldn't it make sense if instead of paying, all this 18 billion to the UN, couldn't we take the lion's share of that and start our own sort of, I don't know, kind of Marshall Plan like uh, organization that is led by the U.S. government and does some of these really critical things, like feed starving people in some of these war-torn countries. But it comes with strings that while the U.S. is there, the civil liberties of these people need to be protected. And this kind of thing, because it is quite a bit of money. Like, you can do quite a lot with 18 billion.
Yes, it is. And it is, not, when I look at our foreign assistance budget, I think that we need to think very carefully about and critically about how we are deploying all of our foreign assistance resources. And if you look at the institutions within that whole universe, the ones that do the best job, the ones that have the best track record, are the ones that do have the highest standards. And in this, I'm thinking about, for instance, the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which requires recipient countries. It's a real partnership where we work with those countries and set targets that they commit to meet. And we work with them on financing. We work with them on institutional reform. They have to meet a certain standard before they can even apply. We help them get application ready for Millennium Challenge. And then it's really, these projects have the best track record in terms of success. We need to also do a better job on our bilateral programs when it comes to humanitarian assistance. I think we still have a lot of problems with our bilateral humanitarian and development assistance programs. They're still stuck in a prior era and still underpinned by a lot of bad assumptions. And so we started to do some of this during the Trump administration with Administrator Green and his road to self-reliance, where we were trying to break cycles of aid dependency and help countries break out of this thinking about aid as a dependency, and rather building up their own capabilities. Because if you think about we've been doing these development programs since the 1960s and 70s, basically since after the Cold War. Some of these countries, the fact that they haven't developed, and we've been pouring billions and billions of dollars into development assistance for them, it may not be that, there's definitely problems on the part of the country, but maybe we're doing something wrong here, whether it's with the World Bank or the UN or our bilateral program. Maybe there's something wrong with the way we think about development if if these countries continue to be full-on basket cases after being beneficiaries of hundreds of billions of dollars in development and humanitarian assistance over the past 60 years. So I think that that's something we need to really try to do a little more critical thinking around, in terms of just, and in some ways giving money to the UN is kind of the easy button. It's like, oh, we'll give this money to UN agency and they'll deal with the problem. And it takes us out of the critical thinking mode about, is this really going to help advance peace and security and prosperity in this country? So I think that there does need to be a radical rethinking about how we engage. And I think we see this in fits and starts, but it has not been consistent, and it has not been, and it gets undermined every time we change, every new administration. I feel like that because people come in and want to do things differently, or they want to go back to a much more traditional approach on assistance.
I'm just thinking about all this money we're giving. It seems so easy to spend other people's money.
Yep, it is. And I think that's another thing that our policymakers, especially at USAID and at the offices at the State Department and USAID that give money to UN agencies, they don't really think of this as, taxpayer money. They think of it as their money. And I'm like, this is not your money. It's not it's that money that belongs to the American taxpayers, and we are stewards of it. And we have an obligation and responsibility to be good stewards.
To get something for that investment.
Well, and to make sure that we know that the agencies, funds, and programs that are receiving these funds are credible recipients, that they are doing what they are supposed to be doing with the money, and that they are meeting expectations of effectiveness.